Planet Drum Foundation in San Francisco for 35 years. We've been promoting the idea of bioregions, and that's what we're talking about today. What is a bioregion? How do you recognize bioregional characteristics? And what do you do about it? How does this consciousness actually end up informing action? There is a tremendous need to not only transform our consciousness about the relationship of people to nature, but to actually begin living a different kind of life that is geared toward blending with nature. I guess the most powerful thing I've heard recently about the need for this is that the Center for Disease Control in the United States has made the statement that climate change is no longer simply about the weather, but that it affects the fundamental building blocks of life. And the reason why they're saying this is that the rates of certain kinds of disease are increasing exponentially because of a small increase in temperature. Particularly Lyme disease in New England is up 10 times the rate that was originally predicted for 2011. That's exponential. Exponential changes are changes that are more than just simple doubling. It's increasing by vast numbers, 10, 100 times. We're not really used to this kind of thinking. Exponential change isn't the kind that people normally deal with. In fact, I'm not sure how we're going to deal with it. But things are that bad. The good part is that although recognition of this is slow, the type of recognition is becoming very powerful. 2 nations in South America now have rewritten their constitutions to include the rights of nature. I don't know if you can get right away what a change this is, but previously rights in documents of that type, constitutions, covered people and property. Property had rights, people had rights, but nature did not have rights. Now in Ecuador or Bolivia, if you're undertaking some project that has impact on a natural area, nature's rights can be represented by a lawyer on the same level as individual or property rights. So now a case has to satisfy personal, property, and nature's rights. This is a profound change. I don't know how it's going to work out eventually. It took our own constitution a long time to recognize non-white and non-male citizens. 200 years to actually get that into our recognition. So it might be a long time before we see a lot of progressive change from the rights of nature. But at least to consider it on that level is a profound way to confront the current degree of, damage to the biosphere that we're seeing. Very dominant characteristics of Northern California bioregion. Redwood trees don't grow anywhere else on the planet except in the Northern California bioregion. And as far as oaks are concerned, I guess the aha moment for me was in Alaska when I said to someone that there were 16 species of oaks in California. And the person said, Mr. Berg, there are only 16 species of trees in Alaska. Watershed. It's the basin created by landforms that carries water toward the center or the valley. In American English, we call that the watershed. In British English, the watershed is the top point of that basin. So, for example, the Central Valley Basin between the Coast Range and the Sierra Nevada, we call the watershed. The English would call the peak of the Sierra Nevada the watershed. That's why sometimes in conversation you'll hear someone say, the watershed moment was such and such. They mean the highest point was such and such. But watershed in natural terms in the United States means the whole water basin. The next characteristic is native plants and animals. And in this case, they're shown on this map as the vegetation range of the redwoods on the coast and in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the ring of oaks. Landforms are valleys and mountains, hills and flat places. The form that the land takes in terms of elevation, usually. And the big characteristic of the Northern California bioregion is the landforms of the Coast Range, which causes rain to fall on the coast, and the Sierra Nevada, which causes snow in the mountains. We're going to make a map now of the place where you live as a bioregion, and we'll see the impact of people on the map that you make.
Put the letter N for north, because when you're making a map, it's necessary to orient everything around us. Simple. If you have north in the upper right-hand corner, it means that that's going to be north for all the characteristics you put in. Is everybody with this so far? Okay. The next is the water body that's closest to the place where you live. Water body here can mean a pond or a stream. It could be the San Francisco Bay. It could be the Pacific Ocean. It could be an extinct water spot such as Lake Dolores, which is now Dolores Park. That used to be a big lake. That's why the mission is so close to it. There are other water sources that are covered up. The closest one to you might be a storm sewer drain. They put the storm sewers where the creeks used to be. Cesar Chavez is the watershed of Islay Creek. Does anybody having trouble with this? When you put the water body in, it's going to determine the scale of the map. If you put... The next characteristic is landform. And for this, I'd like you to put the high ground that sends water to the water body that you just drew. For example, Twin Peaks sends water into Islay Creek watershed. I live on a hill at the bottom of one, so my hill is my landform. Use black for this. Does everybody have their landform?
We're getting there.
The next one is going to be a little trickier, especially for urbanites, and that is soil. As an urbanite, you're not supposed to know what soil is, but remember, we're changing the identity of human beings. The best thing people are doing. try to give us some size, because we're going to be showing you that. And it would be good for people to say your opinion about that. So we got people in, and now let's name it. Give a name to the place where you live. It might be the same name that is commonly used, like San Francisco, or I think my favorite is Otavalo, native woman in Ecuador, who was in a workshop like this and named it Mi Paradiso, my paradise.
We have raccoons that know how to climb up fences to get to the garbage cans. And
break into houses and raid the kitchen.
and I have chert as a soil type. I don't know if that's a soil type. My map was rich people got the best views, poor people got the best weather, bird.
Dolores Lagoon used to be right here. It's underground. It is where the original Mission Dolores was first built before it moved to Dolores in 16. Basic, Glen Park, Mount Davidson, Twin Peaks, Mount.
Anna's hummingbird is an California or San Francisco hummingbird, and the American habitat, which we see out here. As far as the worst and best, that was really hard. It would take me a week to figure out. But anyway, I said paving over the land or buying cars, and so to counteract that, I said city car share or zip car is a nice solution, and community gardening.
The thing that probably I find the most disturbing is this the general tendency to fill in the bay, and the fact that so much of the bay has been lost to development. You know, a couple decades maybe before the gold rush, they described whenever there was a loud noise, the skies would blacken with the birds that would leave. There's so many millions and millions of marsh birds.
The worst thing is probably the fill, but I think the best thing is that this bioregion has created a conducive area where humans can live. So I'd say, you know, the kind of cultural society that has arisen from the mission is probably one of my highlights of this bioregion, is that it's created a conducive place for us to live, create cultural centers, be a center of cultural life, and it's made possible and shaped by our geography.
I live in Mission and I think of Dolores Lagoon. In terms of soil, I think it's clay. On Bernal, when I climb up the hill, I get red.
I call my area the Ohlone Lake. But a lot of these creeks have been daylighted in the East Bay, which is really something great. The creek that we live on is Cerrito Creek, and it's the boundary between Contra Costa and Alameda counties. And it digs a very deep canyon, which is so interesting. It implies something about the soil that I don't know yet.
To the north, you start going up again towards the Cliff House area, and this forms a basin right here, which Lake Merced is actually a largely natural lake, even though it's surrounded by a golf course and looks very contrived. It's a natural basin. The fallway, or the lowest point in this watershed here that's well defined, is right by Lake Merced. And then if you go east, you start going up towards Mount Davidson. So if you're anywhere in this area, you can see, just look around, do a 360, and you can see the boundaries of this watershed.
In that whole sort of Port of Oakland and all the berths, there is one really cool part. There's a lot of impact, but there's also a potential impact to be positive moving forward.
My stomping ground.
Yeah, my stomping ground.
Great.
I've had to be here for a while, so. This is Heron's Head Park, named because this is where you are, and it looks exactly like Heron's Head. We didn't purposely put things here to make it look like a heron. It is natural. It's definitely a very important piece of land that the Pacific Flyway uses for habitat.
Originally, there wasn't an environment movement. There was a sense of conservation, to conserve some of the natural resources, where areas are being designated as national parks. The conservation movement was, let's save some of this wildness so people in the future can see it and experience it. The environment movement per se didn't begin until the middle of the last century, when people started realizing the changes that industrial civilization were wreaking on human environments. Pollution, overpopulation, development, destruction of natural habitat, loss of species. Those kinds of things began to influence people's impressions of what society should be. So the environment movement began mostly with a negative approach as a protest movement, saying no, like no to Love Canal, no to the fact that the Ohio River caught on fire, no to acid rain, that sort of thing, no to killing whales. The environment movement per se was mostly characterized by protest. In the 80s, sustainability within our environment became the new addition. So environmentalism at this point seems a bit antique. Yes, it's good to stop doing the things that are bad, but what are the things that are good, that we should be doing? That's the mission of the sustainability movement. And it takes a lot of different forms. One of them is this idea of a bioregion, meaning that the place where you live, regardless of whether it's in a city, the country, bordering a national park, any human site of inhabitation is part of a natural area. We live in national parks. We just don't know it. A bioregion is one of the ways to deal with this idea of fitting people back into nature.